Lech Lecha. These are God's first words to Abram. He was Abram then, he was not yet Abraham. That'll come later. Lech Lecha. Go forth. But I feel that by the time God orders Abraham to go, he, in a lot of ways, had already left. Now, maybe not physically. Maybe not physically. But leaving was possibly the last and least relevant step of his process, this unfolding process, his long unfolding process of departing. See, the Midrash is telling us that Abraham had awakened to the one God long before he heard the booming voice. Already in his father's house, the Midrash tells us, his father, who was not only an idol worshiper, but who had a store, a shop, where he sold idols. Abraham had already moved beyond the polytheistic practices of his father that had, at this point, at this time in his life, he had already found to be completely ludicrous. And he knew that a chasm had been growing in his heart, a distance between him and his father, a distance between him and his life, a distance between him and his world. He had realized that he no longer belonged there. So by the time God's command to leave his father's house, to let go, reject his father's way of worship, Abraham had already gone through the painful, heartbreaking process of mourning that loss. And it was really not a stretch for him to leave with his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot, because he knew that he had already been uprooted, that he felt alone in the world in which he lived. And in fact, perhaps leaving was hopeful to him, to wander towards the unknown. It is a poignant, powerful story that our sages are telling, that the Torah is inviting us into a story that resonates, I'm sure, with a lot of us. Many of us who have experienced that kind of departure, where it was a physical departure from the home of our parents as we ventured into the world, as we took steps into our lives, into the next stage of our life. So whether it was just a container of a relationship where we felt we no longer belonged and had to get out, or simply because we knew that our life path lied elsewhere. It is a story that resonates with me deeply. This Lech Lecha story is in a lot of ways a story that I experienced when I turned 18 and decided that the container of my life in France was no longer where I felt I belonged, where the life path that my father had wanted and carved out for me was no longer something that I wished to engage upon. And so I had my Lech Lecha moment, and I packed my stuff and left for Israel. Little did I know that 10 years later I would go through another Lech Lecha moment, packed all my stuff, and land here. But there are several Lech Lecha moments in our lives if we only pay attention. Those moments where we are urged somehow from the voice within to leave wherever we find ourselves and move forward. You know, we are among the lucky ones, you know. We're among the lucky ones that at some day, at some point, can decide to leave our land, to leave our parental house, to leave a relationship because we can, because we need to, because we want to, because we live in the Western society that is a democracy, and it allows us to have this kind of choices. Now, there are millions of Lech Lecha moments that look very different than mine or yours. There are millions of people who abruptly leave their land, leave their home, leave the roots of their ancestry, not because they want to, but because the country in which they live has been torn apart by violence and war, and they escape with their shirt on their backs, carrying their children, because their lives and the lives of their children are in danger. Their neighborhoods dilapidated, their countries falling apart, war at their doorstep. And many of the wars that are today causing these vast migrations, make no mistakes, are wars that are caused by global warming. We cover them up saying they are, civil wars. But there are people that are rising in civil wars because the drought is so harsh that they have no longer means to feed themselves. They have no longer anything to support their families. And so their result is that they try to rise against government that don't give them the time of day. These wars, make no mistakes, are caused by global warming. And we, the northern countries of the Western world, find ourselves responsible for these wars, for the decades, the century. We have cultivated and built this plundering society of ours on the backs of those, what we call third world countries, developing countries. That violence that they are experiencing in their neighborhoods, that stems from their political framework disintegrating, that comes from lawlessness, from poverty, from corruption, from their countries being overrun by drug lords. In this too, we, the countries who live in the Northern Hemisphere, have a responsibility, because for decades we have manipulated their political environment to fit our needs. We have plundered their lands to give us the raw materials that we need. We have strangled their economies. Of all of those, the time has come for us to know our part in it, to know our responsibility in it. These people are not leaving all that they ever knew for centuries for no reason. And we are a huge part in what is causing their running away from their homes. Those waves of migration coming from the south into the north, coming from Africa and the Middle East and into Europe, from South and Latin America into North America and through our borders are only the first waves of many to come. And I watch these fathers and mothers carrying their children, carrying all that they can possibly take with them on their long journeys, bonding together into those caravans of displaced people, seeking strength in numbers. I watch them and I think of Abraham and Sarai. I think of Jacob and his clan having to flee Canaan because of the drought, because of famine, and to find refuge in Mitzrayim, in Egypt. I think of Moses and the 12 tribes wandering through the desert in search of a new promised land. But I also think of our ancestors, victim of a war that Rome brought to us, dispersing the survivors of our people across the whole Roman Empire. I think of our ancestors who lived in Babylonia, who were kicked out and went to Persia, and then were kicked out of Persia and went back to Babylonia. I think of our ancestors who lived in Jerusalem and then were pushed out and found themselves resettling in Cairo. And from Egypt, pushed again towards Libya, and from Libya to Tunisia, and from Tunisia to Algeria, to Morocco, to Spain. From Tiberias to Rome, from Italy to France, to England even, to Germany. And we thought we could settle down there, but that was not to be, because yet again, a generation later, sometime not even a generation later, we were kicked out, pushed, expulsed from all of these countries. From Spain, we went to Turkey and to Rhodes. From Western Europe, we suddenly found ourselves in Hungary, in Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, Russia. We thought maybe we would be okay there, but that was not to be either. Yet again, another turn of history, and here we were packing our stuff, getting on boats, and finding ourselves here in this land, and we thought we could maybe build a home here. And for now, we're here. For now. My family in the 1960s, like many Jews who lived in Arab lands, were kicked out. My family, my grandparents, my father, my uncle, my aunt, packed 2 suitcases and left a whole life behind them. It's 1962. It's just last year almost. It just happened to us. We were kicked out of North Africa, of Iran, of Iraq, of Lebanon, of Syria, of Egypt. Migrated again. Tried to find another home somewhere else. My parents came to the south of France. We are a nation of immigrants. Our name, Hebrews, Ivrim, means, I have it right here, those who traverse. Those who traverse. Because we have traversed for 3,000 years, watched empires crumble and survived. We have traversed through history and through most of the world. We are the quintessential immigrant nation, the wandering Jews. We are them, and they are us. There's a quote from Leviticus that I want to leave you with. When strangers come to reside with you in your land, you shall not wrong them. The strangers who reside with you shall be to you as your citizens. I've got to say that again. The strangers who reside with you shall be to you as your citizens. You shall love each one as yourself. You shall love each one as yourself. For you too were strangers in a strange land. Some years ago, our people were fleeing for their lives. Our people were fleeing from Nazi-occupied Europe, trying to find refuge in this country. But this country, like today, has had its doors closed to us. Boats were turned around and sent back to the ports of Europe. And our people disembarked from those boats only to find themselves in Auschwitz, in Treblinka, dying behind the barbed wires of the concentration camps. Because this America refused to welcome them. We, the Jewish people, cannot stand idly by when in our name history is repeating itself. We are to heed the words of our Torah, to shout them out loud to the people who supposedly claim the Bible as their guide for their lives, to remind them of the words of Leviticus, and to live by these words, to stand at the borders and open its doors wide, to not let these people die, to not push these people away and send them back to the places where their lives are endangered. We are the ones, we the Jewish people. We have a duty to heed the words of Torah. We have a duty to heed our own history and take a stand and shout our voice and take action.